So again, my name is Jerry Minor-Gordon. Our presenters today include Barbara Alfano from our Region 4 office, Brian Gross from our Region 4 office, and Jose Garcia from our Region 9 office. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started with today's presentation. So what are we doing here? The purpose of this training is to assist you all in preparing your proposals. Hopefully you've had a chance to read the guidelines, so some of this information may seem familiar to you, but this is your opportunity to ask clarifying questions. In the event that there's any information in this presentation that differs from the guidelines is our standing official document. So we try to take care to make sure that everything is in alignment, but just in case it's not, you want to go with the information that's presented in the guidelines, not in today's presentation. And if you have very site-specific questions pertaining to a site that you're interested in either assessing or cleaning up, or you have a very specific question that is geared more towards your program, we do encourage you to contact the regional person that's listed in Section 7 of the guidelines. Our regional colleagues are extremely knowledgeable, and they're there to assist you, and they're the ones who are very much involved in making decisions on sites and applicants who are eligible for our funding. And so they're a great resource for you to clarify some questions that you have beyond what's being presented today in the webinar. And I'll also have a slide at the end of the webinar with their contact information. This year in FY17, we will not have a competitive revolving loan fund competition. We are on alternating cycles, so we'll have another competition in 2018. But for the upcoming year, we will solicit requests from high-performing existing RLF grantees who can demonstrate a need for additional funding. And that information will be circulated through the regional offices. So those of you who are current RLF grantees, you'll get that information sometime in the spring. The anticipated timeline for this year's competition is that proposals are due on December 20th. Roughly between April and May is when we plan to make our selections. June to July is when those who are selected will be working on their work plans and submitting additional grant paperwork that's required to process the award. And between July and October is when the funds will become available. So there is, of course, a chance that these dates will change for various reasons, but the date that will remain the same is December 20th when the proposals are due. We're offering two types of grants this grant competition cycle, assessment and cleanup. For assessment, eligible entities include governments, quasi-governments, regional councils, and tribes. And for cleanup, the same group applies, plus nonprofits. And for a full list of eligible applicants, please review Section 3A in the guidelines. The amount of funding that's available for assessment, we have three different categories, the first being community-wide, secondly site-specific, and finally assessment coalitions. For community-wide proposals, these are applicants who have an idea of what sites are in their community, but they have not made a commitment to one particular site to work on, and they hope to work on a number of sites, thus community-wide. And if you're interested in that type of funding, you can apply for up to $200,000 in hazardous substance funding or $200,000 in petroleum funding. Now, many of our applicants are also interested in applying for both pots of money, and if that applies to you, what is new this year for you to know is that you can apply for up to $300,000 for a combination of hazardous substances and petroleum funding, where not one grant type can exceed $200,000. So for example, if your need in your community is more geared towards hazardous substance funding, then you could apply for up to $200,000. And if you still need petroleum funding, you could also apply for $100,000. That would give you your combined $300,000. You can use any combination of funding. It can be 150 of each grant type, for example. But again, the important thing to remember is that neither of the categories can exceed $200,000. If you are applying for site-specific application, so you have one particular site in mind that you hope to tackle with the assessment funding, you can apply for up to $200,000 or up to $350,000 with additional information justifying why you need the extra $150,000. And the criteria for which we are scoring you against, not scoring, but evaluating rather at that point is outlined in the guidelines. And finally, for assessment, our assessment coalitions. These are applicants who have pooled their resources together, so 3 or more separate legal entities can apply for up to $600,000 for any combination of hazardous substance and petroleum funding. The period of performance for assessment grants is 3 years, and common eligible grant activities include inventory, characterizing sites, assessing the sites, reuse and cleanup planning, and conducting community involvement. On the cleanup side, you can apply for up to $200,000 per site, and we let the applicant define what the site is, and you can apply for up to 3 sites per competition round, totaling no more than $600,000. There is a 20% cost share requirement based on the amount of funding that you're seeking from EPA, and Brian will talk about the cost share requirement and how that can be met in his presentation. The period of performance is also 3 years, and common eligible activities include cleanup activities, reuse planning, reuse planning and community involvement as well. So those are the common eligible activities. We mainly focus on the types of activities that you cannot carry out with these types of grants. So if there's a question about an eligible activity, please consult with the guidelines in the FAQs. Okay, just to highlight some important changes to this year's guidelines. One, you'll see in the guidelines that we have a DUNS number verification requirement. And the reason this is in there is because when you submit your proposals through grants.gov, grants.gov is not able to differentiate if your DUNS number for your organization or for your department is correct. And we can only award funds to applicants who have correct information that we can process the money to your account. So on the front end, we need to make sure that this information is available to us and it is correct, so we will be checking it. And if there's an issue, we do have the opportunity to come back to you to clarify and make sure that we get the correct information from you. However, we certainly stress that you make sure that this information is correct on at the beginning of this process and on your 424, which is a required document that you'll need to fill out. We've had a couple of instances where the city has numerous departments, so if you have a question whether or not your DUNS number is correct, please check now. Also, we tried to clarify this year the submission instructions. We want to make clear to you all that it is not enough to just submit your proposal by the deadline. Your proposal must be submitted and successfully received by grants.gov by 11:59 p.m. on December 20th. So if there is some type of issue that is not allowing your application or your proposal to process through grants.gov, it will be late and we will not be able to accept it. And so I will walk through in the next few slides some tips to make sure that you meet this deadline. Also, you'll see that the threshold criteria are streamlined a bit this year and are all contained in one section. Also new this year, ranking criteria versus evaluation criteria. Per agency requirements, we needed to restructure our guidelines a bit, and so Section 4 outlines the items that we need you to respond to and all of the information that needs to be included in your narrative and in your required attachments. And then Section 5, the evaluation criteria, outlines how we are going to evaluate the information that you presented to us. Because it's not enough just to answer the question. It depends on how well you answered the question and how much your need aligns with what our program's efforts are. And finally, for those who are applying for for a cleanup grant, there is a community notification requirement. And in previous years, the language has read that you must place a community notification ad in your local newspaper or equivalent means. This year, moving forward, it must be published by the date listed in the guidelines on December 6th. So if you are in a community where ads only run once a week, that ad needs to run by December 6th, not that you placed it. It needs to run by that deadline. So that's just a few of the changes that we've made since last year. For a complete list of changes, please review the summary of changes document. It's available in the pod, in the file pod for you to download if you've not already. It's also available on the Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization website. And hopefully the hyperlink is working once you've downloaded the slides for today's presentation. So your submission materials will include your cover letter, 2 pages, your 15-page narrative, and the required attachments. Those 3 components will make up what we call your proposal. Your proposal plus the required application for federal assistance documents will then be your application package. So sometimes we use the term proposal and application package interchangeably, but this is the differentiation. So we want to make sure that you understand that what you're providing, what you're creating for us will be your proposal, and then once you get into the grants.gov system, it will prompt you to also complete this other federal assistance requirement. So you won't miss it because you won't be able to submit without it. So let's spend just a couple of slides talking about grants.gov. It was a new requirement for our program last year, and we definitely saw an opportunity to improve our outreach and making sure that applicants are knowledgeable on how to submit their proposals successfully. And so we want to make sure that you have the tools that you need. So register now in grants.gov and review the website. They actually have some really helpful applicant tools and tips available that talk you through how to upload your proposal and how to submit it successfully. And we also have prepared, of course, our frequently asked questions. There's a new section in there now with some of the questions that we received last year regarding grants.gov. And we also prepared a grants.gov tip sheet to walk you through how to successfully submit your proposal. As I mentioned before, you need to have the correct DUNS number for your organization or department. Additionally, in registering in grants.gov, you must also be registered in sam.gov. And we highly recommend doing this now if you've never registered in SAM. If you've already registered in SAM, you want to make sure that your account is still active by the deadline. As you know, SAM must be renewed annually. And we don't want a situation where December 20th is rolling around and that is the exact date that your SAM registration expired. So please make sure that this account will be active during December 20th, because if it's not, your proposal will not be accepted by grants.gov and we will not be able to take your proposal through any other means. So please make sure that this is active ahead of time. We had a few cases last year where applicants were in the process of updating their registration, and that took about, I think, like 24 to 48 hours, and then the deadline came and went, and then the next day they were registered, but that next day was too late for our deadline. So we don't want that to happen to you. Please make sure that you are registered in SAM and that you will be registered an active registration during December 20th. Another issue that we saw last year was a number of applicants did not have the correct person submitting their application. So within your organization, there must be someone who is authorized by your your e-business point of contact, and we call that person the Authorized Organization Representative, the AOR. And now grants.gov knows when it is not the correct AOR submitting the proposal, and it will reject your application. And you'll find out pretty quickly if that happens. But if you are not the correct person listed to submit the application, you probably also won't get a notification saying that your application did not process correctly. So again, we want to make sure that you're registered in grants.gov, in sam.gov, and that you know who your authorized organization representative is, and that they have the login information that they need to submit the proposal for your community. As I mentioned, you're going to also have to be required to submit a 424, an application for federal assistance. With this page, I like to tell applicants, please don't stress out about it. This is a requirement to submit your complete application package, but in the event there's any information that is not correct, we can update that information if you are selected for funding. However, as I mentioned, we do need your correct DUNS number, so if nothing else, that needs to be correct on this form. But just a couple of things to keep in mind. Box 18 is the estimated funding box. We just want to give you a heads up to make sure that when you're filling this out, this is the box where you tell us how much funding you need from EPA and then how much funding that you will contribute to the project. So if you are a cleanup applicant, that's where we would see your 20% cost share contribution. For assessment, there is not a cost share requirement, so we would not expect applicants to contribute any additional funds. When you're reading through the guidelines, there is a section on your ability to leverage resources. And I hope this doesn't confuse you, but we do not want you to list that on the 424. Any information that we're asking for leveraged resources, please respond within the 15-page narrative and the required attachments if applicable. But we do not want to see leveraged resource contributions listed on the 424. Another section that caused a little bit of heartburn last year is box 19, the application, if it's subject to review by the state intergovernmental review office. You have 3 options to select from, and because at this point you are just submitting your proposal, you have not yet been selected for funding, it really doesn't matter what box you check here. So, if you're unsure or don't feel comfortable, I advise checking off section B, which just says that the program is not subject to the executive order. That it is subject to the executive order, but has not been selected by state review. Or if you know that your program is not covered by this executive order at all, then you can certainly select option C. But again, this is not for you to go and submit your work plan to your state intergovernmental review office. That will only happen if you are selected for funding and if it is a state that requires it. A couple recommendations that we have that are listed in the grants.gov tip sheet is to make your proposal PDF searchable. So convert your files into PDF. That helps us here at EPA find important information quickly. Also, if at all possible, we really encourage applicants to combine all of their submission materials into one single file. That allows us to make sure that we have all the information that you intended to send with your application. And the last point here is actually more of a requirement, less of a recommendation. You want to make sure that your file name does not exceed 50 characters, and that's because grants.gov will then not accept your application. Okay, so moving on to the notification emails that you should expect to receive after you have submitted your application through grants.gov. The AOR, that authorized organization representative, will then get a series of emails from the grants.gov system. So again, if you submitted it and you're not the AOR, you're not going to get any of these notification emails to tell you whether or not grants.gov successfully took in your application, or if there were issues with your application and it was rejected. So again, it's very important that the correct person submit the proposal packet. So the first email is you're going to get a submission receipt from grants.gov. And you're going to say, great, I'm confirmed, I have my receipt, I'm good to go, I don't have anything else to do. But no, you want to make sure that you read that email thoroughly, because that email tells you in the next 24 to 48 hours you're going to receive another email. And within that first email, towards the bottom will be a tracking number and a link to your application in grants.gov so you can track it. That's a great resource for you so you can see, has it been accepted? Has it been rejected? Is there anything else that we need to do? So that's the first email that you're going to get from grants.gov. The second email then is going to tell you whether or not your proposal was what they call validated. That means that it was accepted successfully, or it was rejected with whatever the error is. For instance, the AOR did not submit the application. And if your proposal did not transmit successfully and you can't figure out what happened, please call the help desk. The grants.gov help desk is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, except for federal holidays, and their number is listed here on the slide as well as on the grants.gov website. They are extremely responsive and helpful, so please, if you run into an issue, you want to call them. And while EPA, we're here to help as much as we can, this is an area where we cannot help you. So you really have to call the grants.gov help desk to help troubleshoot your issue and get your application in by the deadline. So this is another reason why we really recommend not waiting until the last minute to submit your proposal. So last minute means different things to different people. To us, it means 2 to 3 days in advance of the deadline, just in case you have a problem that you need to resolve. And if you do call the grants.gov help desk, please make sure to get a case number. That will provide me an opportunity to see the transcript between your conversation with them, and if in the event there's anything that EPA can do to intervene, that's my only opportunity to do so, is to have a case number. So please make sure that you receive that from the grants.gov help desk. Okay. So the other two emails that the AOR should receive are that the application is being retrieved from the grants.gov system into EPA system. So that's a really great sign. And then the final email is just assigning it an EPA tracking number. So let me just back up. I'd say the first two emails are the most important, and the second one, making sure that your proposal was validated, not rejected. Okay, so I'm going to now move into the materials that you need to submit with your proposal, and that includes your 2-page cover letter, and in the guidelines it lists all the items that we would like you to respond to for all of these sections. But for the cover letter, we also want you to attach the state acknowledgement letter, and Brian's going to talk about that a bit in his slides. Also, we would like you to attach your other factors checklist if any of the other factors that are listed in Appendix 3 apply to you as a community. If they do, you want to check them off. Let us know what page number we can find that information in your narrative and include that with your cover letter. For assessment proposals, if you are applying for assessment, in Section 1F of the guidelines, it lists regional priorities. And regional priorities are, just as it sounds, each region has put forth a set of priorities that they would like to focus on this year. And so if you are a community that falls into one of the categories for the region from which you are applying, you would use this form to let us know which of the regional priorities apply to you from your region and include that with the cover letter. Also to include in your proposal is the 15-page narrative. That includes any citations. All must be included within the 15 pages. Anything beyond the 15 pages will be removed and will not be evaluated. And your required attachments. throughout the guidelines, you'll see a list of attachments that we're asking for. We ask that you limit your attachments to what is required and what is relevant for your proposal type, and not include information that we did not ask for. And finally, please follow our formatting guidelines, that your proposal is within 1-inch margins. It uses a 12-point font, and the font type being Times New Roman, Arial, or Calibri, and no maps. So just some tips for you to keep in mind. Read the entire guidelines. They are different from last year, so please do not use last year's guidelines. Write as if the reader knows nothing about your community, because chances are you're going to get reviewers evaluating your responses who do not know anything about your particular community. You want to make sure that you address all the criteria, and if a criterion doesn't apply to you, make sure that you state that and tell us why it doesn't apply to you. Otherwise, we're going to think that you skipped it, and you may not be awarded any points for that criterion. As I mentioned before, it's not sufficient to just respond to the criterion. It is the quality to the quality of your response and how well it aligns with our program's efforts. And there are checklists within the guidelines just to have, just for you to do a final check to make sure that you have everything that we're asking for. You do not need to submit this with your proposal. Actually, please do not submit this with your proposal. That's just for your records. Just a few more tips. Please avoid using acronyms. I know the government is great for using acronyms and technical jargon, but please avoid doing that in your proposal. If you have a very long organization name or something that you refer to several times throughout your proposal, it is fine to spell it out the first time and then use abbreviations moving forward. It's helpful to us if you number your pages and enumerate the criterion to which you're responding. You don't need to restate the criterion, but just saying, 1A, 1B, 1C, that just helps us stay organized and focused on your response. And also, for your attachments, if you organize those, that is a great help to us. We've seen lots of great examples. Some people decide to use a cover page for each of their attachments, or at the top right corner they'll specify what the attachment is for. And again, that just takes the guesswork out of, I'm not sure which criterion this is a response to. So you're making it very clear to the reviewers what it is you want them to evaluate when. Okay, so some writing resources for you. The Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization website has a lot of the documents that I've already talked about. Those same documents are available in the Files to Download pod. Two other resources for you are our Technical Assistance to Brownfields and our Tab Easy, which is a grant writing tool. And for our technical assistance to Brownfields, these are great organizations. We have 3 of them that we're currently funding. They're listed there on the slide, and each EPA region is covered by one of these 3 wonderful organizations. Their services are free to you, absolutely free, and you do not have to be a current Brownfield grantee to take advantage of their resources. Isn't that great? So they can do a myriad of things, including help develop a Brownfields program, help establish site inventories, review historical information. But of course, since you're here, you're probably interested in knowing that they can also help you in reviewing your proposals. So make sure that you contact them early. Resources are limited. So you want to make sure that they are aware that you are going to apply, and you can see how they can best assist you. And the Tab Easy grant writing tool is an awesome tool for folks to use in preparing your assessment and cleanup grant applications. And there's actually a webinar tomorrow at 2 p.m. Blaze Levin, I believe he's on the call today, will be hosting tomorrow's webinar, and I'll have the link at the end of today's presentation. Or you can go to www.tabez.org, and there is information listed on their website. But it's a very user-friendly tool. You can access it anytime and work at your own pace. And it integrates a lot of information that we use every year in our Brownfields program. And so they've done a great job in pulling that information together and assisting applicants in preparing their proposals. Okay, so I've talked quite a bit. We're going to stop here for questions. So Barbara, are there any questions?
Jerry, can you hear me, everybody?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So there have been very good questions. There's a couple I want to share with folks, and maybe you can help because I've never heard of a CAGE code. We have somebody that asked about a municipality having a CAGE code, which is CAGE, instead of a SAMS number. Are you familiar with that, Jerry, or anybody else as the presenters?
I have heard of a CAGE code, but to be honest with you, I'm not that familiar with it. And so a SAM.gov account is required to submit an application. So if that person does not have a SAM account, they still need to register. And I'd say maybe contacting the grants.gov help desk may be their best option to make sure that they know how to proceed next steps.
Okay, well, thank you. And let's see, there was one that just came in that I haven't had a chance to answer yet. Are agencies allowed to apply for both an assessment grant and cleanup grant in the same year as long as they stay under funding thresholds?
Yes. Yes, they are.
Alrighty, they're coming in fast and furious now. Does the authorized representative need to be the project director that's listed in the grant application? Well, we know that no, that is not always the case. And in many cases, it's different. It's somebody different. Do you have to spell out PCBs, PAHs, etc., or would readers know this? I think it's a good idea to definitely spell out all your definitions or acronyms at least once in your application. You can't expect all reviewers to know exactly what you're talking about. Let's see. Heather responds that she believes you do have to have both a CAGE code and a SAMS number for various grants. So there you go. Let's see, will the slides be accessible? Yes, they're up there in the files to download box, along with a lot of other items if you weren't on in the beginning when Jerry started the webinar. We explained that there is a ton of good information in the files to download box. And Mary asks, are you able to apply for a cleanup grant in subsequent years for the same site if you have already been awarded a cleanup grant? And Brian, you're answering. Do you want to go ahead and answer that, Brian?
Yeah, sure. Not for the same site. The $200,000 per site would apply.
Oh, Deborah, thank you. Deborah says a very valuable thing that we need to share. She says that grants.gov is scheduled for maintenance from December 17th to the 19th.
Ha! Thank you, Deborah. I did not know that. So I hope everyone on the call knows, and I'll double check with grants.gov and see if we can post something on our website just so that everyone else is aware of that maintenance time frame. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's see. So Deborah, another Deborah asks, where can we find the regional priorities form? Is it something we fill out? Deborah, that is not so much it's called the other factors form. Do you want to talk about that, Jerry? I'll look for where that is.
Sure. The regional priorities, the list of regional priorities are in only the assessment guidelines, section 1F, so that's page 11.
There it is.
And the form that I referred to is on the very last page of the guidelines. The top section of the page talks about the regional priorities, and that's where we ask you to provide the title of the regional priority that you are claiming and the page number of where that information is justified in your narrative.
Okay, Dave asks, for a coalition grant, is there a required breakdown between hazardous and petroleum? For example, could the coalition apply for $400K for assessment for hazardous and $200K for petroleum?
That's correct. You can apply for any combination of funding that meets your needs.
Sherry, yes, that is correct. Jerry did say that grants.gov will reject the application if it is submitted from someone other than the authorized representative. Darren, what other means are acceptable if an entity does not have newspaper for publishing community notices? Go ahead, Jerry. I'm going to read down. I'm going to go through some of these others.
Sure. So whatever it is the equivalent means for your community on how you would normally advertise and spread the word, if you will. So if it's through newsletters that you circulate online, if you do flyering door to door, whatever the acceptable means is for your community, and you'll have to justify that in the threshold section. Brian, did you have any more input since that's the section that you're covering?
I'm sorry, Jerry, say that again?
If a community does not normally submit an ad to be ran to meet the cleanup notification requirement, what are some other means that they can meet that requirement?
Oh, I would say whatever is appropriate for your community. The most common we see is something in a newspaper or other news source.
Okay, let's see. Amy asks, can you apply for a cleanup grant in the future if your site has already received an assessment grant? Absolutely. That is what we like to see. And then she goes on to ask, so even if there are different applicants within the same government entity. For cleanup grants, the applicant has to own the site. So that's as long as the applicant for the cleanup grant owns that site, then that's okay. Okay, wow, okay, these are great questions. So does it work against an applicant if there are two entities applying for the same geographic area? One is a coalition and the other a community-wide. One is a current grantee and the other is a new applicant. I'll let you answer that, Jerry.
No, it would not. EPA does not, I guess, rank proposals against each other based on geographic coverage. So each entity will be its own proposal that will be evaluated. We can't guarantee whether or not they'll be evaluated by the same reviewers, but there's nothing in our guidelines that would suggest that we would in any way penalize applicants for doing that.
Okay, and I think we're coming to the end here. Denise asks, for assessment grants, are state-mandated fees for the applicant who will be considered the remediating parties, is that eligible grant costs? So state VCP fees are eligible grant costs. So I'm thinking
they are eligible grant costs as long as you are enrolling the site into the VCP for assessment activities if you are applying for assessment funds. Now, if you're applying for assessment funds and using assessment funding to pay for enrollment into the VCP of a site that's being cleaned up, then it would not be eligible.
Oh, okay. She says we do not have a VCP program anymore, just Lust State Response Program.
I would have to just double check on the response to make sure that I'm giving the right one. So Denise, if you wouldn't mind just providing your contact information in the chat box, and I can research that just to be sure.
Okay, I think that wraps up the questions. We had some in the beginning, but we did respond to each of those as they came across. So I think we're done, and I guess Brian Gross, you're going to take the next section.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara, and thanks, Jerry. Also, I saw a couple of questions come in about the question about maintenance on the sam.gov, and according to one of our commenters, it was going to be December 17th through the 19th. I think a couple people asked about that. Yeah, so moving on to the next section. My name's Brian Gross. I'm a Brownfields project officer in Region 4, which is the southeast region, and we're in Atlanta. And I'm going to talk about the threshold criteria. And what's threshold? Well, a threshold is what you must cross when you're making an entrance. We call this part of the process the threshold because your proposal must clear this bar in order to enter into the competition. The threshold is a pass-fail process, so there's no points involved with what I'll be talking about. But it's an important section because if you don't pass, you're not going to be entered into the scoring competition, which means your proposal will not be funded. We're not going to throw you in jail like they do in Monopoly, but it does mean you won't be eligible for funding. Remember Jerry talked about the proposal package as being the narrative and then the attachments. Well, your threshold information is going to be one of the attachments, so it's not going to count against your 15-page limit. So just remember to include this information as an attachment. Okay, so we're talking about, remember, 3 different types of proposals: community-wide and coalition assessment, which will eventually include multiple sites, the site-specific assessment, and the cleanup proposals. Since the site-specific assessment and the cleanup proposals are dealing with a single individual property, we do the site eligibility when your proposal comes in. That means you need to give us a lot of background information on that individual site, which is what you see in this table here for those 2 types of proposals. So we'll get to those in a minute, but before we do that, we'll cover what applies to any type of proposal, which is the applicant eligibility. And I should also say that the information about this is located in section Roman numeral 3 in the guidelines. Okay, so no matter what type of grant you're applying for, you must answer the question, are you an eligible applicant? For assessment proposals, most of these come in from units of local government, not all, but most, meaning cities, counties, tribes, and states. If you are one of those are self-explanatory, so you don't need to provide backup information. But there are other organizations that can apply for assessment, like councils of government, regional planning councils, and similar organizations. Those are eligible for assessment funding, but they do need to provide documentation of their eligibility. This might be establishing documents from the state legislature, or resolutions and statutes as listed on this slide here. If you're applying for an assessment coalition, remember that does allow you to apply for up to $600,000 as long as you have a minimum of 3 partners. Each of those 3 partners must be an eligible applicant on their own. So that could mean 3 towns apply as a coalition, or 2 towns in a county, or 1 town and 1 county in a regional planning coalition. But just remember, for coalitions, you need a minimum of 3 partners, and each partner must be an eligible applicant on their own merit. For cleanup proposals, I'll point out that nonprofit organizations may apply for cleanup funding, provided they own the site, of course, which was already mentioned, and they just must include documentation of their nonprofit status. Nonprofits generally may not apply for assessment funds unless they also meet the definition of a local government. I'll direct everyone up to the file download box in the corner, or at the top of my screen. The frequently asked questions at the bottom of that list has more information on this. I encourage you to read the frequently asked questions, the FAQs, specifically related to this. You can find them in section C of the FAQs. And I'll also remind you that during the threshold process, if you have questions, you may contact EPA with questions about threshold eligibility. The contacts are listed in section Roman numeral 3 of the guidelines, and they'll also be listed later in this presentation. Okay, so once you've confirmed that you're an eligible applicant, the next thing you need to show is your community involvement. This is part of the threshold process. And for assessment grantees, it's pretty broad. You basically have to just tell us how you're going to have two-way communication with your residents and other stakeholders. Also, as you can see in the middle of this slide, it's going to be discussed later in the ranking portion. So for the purposes of threshold, you can refer to that section of your narrative. You can summarize that section, beg, borrow, and steal from it, and summarize it in this portion of the threshold narrative. So that's for assessment. Moving on to the community involvement or notification process for cleanup proposals. This is a little more involved. You heard Jerry mention publishing an ad, and I think we had a couple of questions about it. The notification process for the cleanup proposals, again, this is on page 22 of the guidelines, of the cleanup guidelines. What it boils down to is that you need to make your information about your proposal available and give people the opportunity to comment on it. So you should do this by publishing an ad or some other type of public notice no later than December 6th, 2016. What that public notice must include is the date and time of a public meeting. These are the bullet points on the slide here. So your public notice should include information about that public meeting, some background information about your application, including where it can be found and reviewed, and last but not least, a method for stakeholders to provide comments on your grant proposal and your cleanup plan. Remember, at this point, you should have an analysis of Brownfields cleanup alternatives, ABCA. What that does is kind of lay out what's known about the contamination at the site and provide a draft of a path forward towards cleanup. To elaborate on what we talked about earlier, the published notice must come out on or before December 6th. So that means if you're going to be relying on a weekly publication, make sure that you include this in an issue that comes out before December 6th. Also, your proposal is going to need to include a summary of any comments you do have. So we suggest not putting this off until the last minute because whatever comments you receive, you're going to need to summarize as part of your threshold write-up. And again, more information on the notification regarding cleanup proposals can be found on pages 22 and 23 of the cleanup guidelines. Okay, for the next few slides, we're going to deal with some information you need to provide for the single site proposals. And remember, this means the site-specific assessment proposals and your cleanup proposals. As part of the threshold process, EPA needs to confirm that your site is an eligible Brownfields property. So what we're asking you to do is just give us some basic site history, a description of the site background, known past uses, and so on. The issues or the perceived issues at your site should correspond to the type of funding you're applying for. And remember, that's either hazardous substance funding or petroleum funding. Also a reminder, if you're a cleanup applicant, you must own the site as of December 20th. I think we had a question about what happens after that, and the requirement is that you must retain ownership of your cleanup site for as long as your grant's open. That's usually 3 years. It can be less if you finish the cleanup activity early and close the grant. Then at that point, you no longer need to maintain ownership. You're free to do with it as you wish. All right, continuing on with the property-specific eligibility requirements. You may or may not know, you probably do, that the Brownfields program is a portion of the Superfund law. So one of the things that we ask you to do is to affirm that your site is not already involved in any other Superfund program, including but not limited to the ones that are listed here, the NPL, National Priorities List, orders, consent decrees, or other enforcement actions under CERCLA, and not subject to the jurisdiction, custody, or control of the U.S. government. Okay, for cleanup proposals, presumably you're coming in for cleanup because you already have an idea that there's contamination out there. What you need to provide for us here is a summary of your previous assessment history that details the kind of contamination that you've found and that you need to address at the site. Usually this is going to be a Phase 2 report or an equivalent document. You don't need to include the entire report. Just please provide a summary of the findings and what you know about the site that requires it to need some cleanup. The bottom half of this slide for both assessment and cleanup proposals, you need to certify that you're not subject to other enforcement actions besides the Superfund ones that we mentioned on the previous slide. The entire list is in the guidelines, but basically this includes other enforcement programs like the RCRA program, TSCA program, and so on. These are rare, but they may trigger what we call a property-specific determination. These don't come along that often, so I won't dwell on these too much. But essentially, what may trigger this is other enforcement actions or even potential enforcement actions that are affecting your site. I'll just encourage you, if you think this might apply to your site-specific assessment proposal or your cleanup site, this would be a good thing to contact your EPA region with questions. And again, we'll have that contact list coming up a little bit later. And it is in section Roman numeral 7 of the guidelines. Okay, this can be one of the stickiest part of our site-specific proposals. This is where you need to provide a little bit of background on the ownership of the site. So bear with me as I go through these. And remember that there's going to be two separate checklists. The first one that we'll talk about here is for hazardous substance sites, and you can see what that includes at the top here. That's pretty much everything except a straight petroleum site. If you have a petroleum site, there's a separate eligibility checklist, which we'll talk about in a minute. And you should have an idea based on the funding you're coming in for which checklist to use. If you're coming in for hazardous substance funding, then you're going to need to answer pretty much the questions on this slide about who contaminated the site, ownership, and so on. And the reason we do this screen is that EPA wants to be sure it's not granting funds to a party that's responsible for the contamination. So this slide shows the ownership criteria for a hazardous substance site. Moving on to petroleum sites, I wanted to point out here that a lot of times EPA collaborates with our state agencies as partners on petroleum sites. So if you have a petroleum site, and this may be a filling station or something like that, those are pretty common in the Brownfields program. Your first call should probably be to your state environmental agency. If your state can determine that it's an eligible petroleum brownfield, they may give you a letter. And if they do, you can just attach that letter to your proposal. If you don't have a petroleum eligibility letter, then you're going to need to provide, as part of your proposal, more background on the site, including the level of risk, who contaminated the site, information about the current and previous owners, and information about their financial viability. There's more detail on this on the guidelines. The thing you should know is to possibly consult with your state environmental agency on petroleum sites. And the main difference is that on petroleum, in addition to the current ownership, we also look at the immediate previous owner. Okay, moving on to cleanup authority. This applies to cleanup applicants. If you are a cleanup applicant, you just need to tell us who's going to be overseeing the cleanup activity. In a lot of cases, this is going to be your state environmental agency, especially if you have already or if you plan to enroll the site into your state's voluntary cleanup program. But essentially what we're looking for in this section is who's going to be overseeing and certifying that your cleanup work is protective to human health and the environment. The other point on this slide, the property access plan. In some cases, you may need to set foot onto your neighboring properties to get maybe access to a corner of your site or even to get to it. If that's the case for your cleanup site, you just need to provide an explanation of how you intend to do that. And hopefully they're already aware of what's going on, and that should not be too much of a problem. Okay, that's it for the site-specific eligibility on the ownership side. The last thing you need to provide for the threshold eligibility, this applies to cleanup applicants, as we already mentioned, is a demonstration of your cost share contribution. This demonstrates that you have some skin in the game and you're committed to the site cleanup. Basically what we're looking for here is an affirmation that you'll be contributing a 20% match of the funds that you're applying for. So remember, the max you can apply for on a cleanup site is $200,000. That means you'd be required to match $40,000, which is 20% of the $200,000. For the purposes of your application, stick to the 20% as it shows in this little yellow box here. That makes it easier on everyone, and you won't get any credit for saying that you're going to exceed the 20%. So, but you do need to explain how you're going to meet the 20%. And as it shows on the slide here, just explain how you're going to provide money, labor, materials, or services from another source to contribute towards the cleanup project. You'll see at the bottom here regarding hardship waivers. These can be granted in very rare cases. And if you want more information about waiving the 20% match, it's on page 21 of the cleanup guidelines, and you can read about that. But I will add that these are very rarely granted. So for the most part, if you're coming in for cleanup funding, you'll need to have an idea of how you intend to match the 20%, required 20% match. Okay, the last thing I'll talk about, which we already discussed, is the notification letter from your state or tribal environmental agency. They just need to provide a letter acknowledging that you're applying for funding under this competition. Most states should be used to this and have a standard form letter that they'll provide. If you are a state or a tribe, you don't need to provide this letter. Otherwise, as we mentioned earlier, this should be an attachment to your cover letter. And the rest of your threshold criteria, which we've already discussed, meaning the affirmation that you're an eligible applicant, the description of your community outreach or notification for cleanup grants, and the response to the site eligibility, that should all be packaged up as an attachment to your narrative and submitted. And that's it. I'll just give one last reminder that with regards to threshold criteria and eligibility questions, you can contact your EPA regional office to discuss that, even while the competition's open. So don't be afraid to do so. We're here to hopefully answer your questions. And again, that list is in section Roman numeral 7 of the guidelines, and we'll have it towards the end of this presentation as well. So I'm going to zip it, and we'll check in to see if there's any questions we need to go over.
Thanks, Brian. I think we got some good questions during your discussion. There were a couple that we can go back to. One was if tires are considered or eligible for cleanup, they're not, generally speaking, they're not considered because they're considered solid waste and not hazardous or petroleum waste. Another question from Rebecca was if the applicant has to own the site for under an assessment grant, and the applicant does not have to own the site. I think you covered that, Brian. But they do have to show if they do own the site, they have to show if they were responsible for contributing to any of the contamination at the site. I think that's it. We did not get a lot of other ones. Hold on, we just got one that came in. Will similar state determined eligibility letters be required later for mixed petroleum and hazardous assessment grants. So it's more on a site-by-site basis as opposed, well, Jerry, maybe you can answer that, but if it's mixed, if it's commingled, then I do not believe, because then that's predominance hazardous. But if it's predominance contamination petroleum, then you will need a state determination letter. Is that correct, Jerry?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll also add on that that can also vary state to state as well as site to site.
Right. All right. Any other questions? If not, we will move on. We will just, if anyone thinks of any questions on Brian's section, please feel free to type them into the box, and we'll be answering those. And I will introduce Barbara Alfano, who will be now covering the ranking criteria section.
Well, thank you very much, Jerry, Brian, and Jose. I really appreciate it. So let's get started on this ranking criteria. Okay, so as Jerry mentioned, the ranking criteria are described in Section 4 of the Guidelines. And for assessment grants, the ranking criteria start on page 30, and for the cleanup grant, ranking criteria start on page 27 of your Guidelines. And you might notice that 10 pages of the Guidelines are devoted to these 5 ranking criteria that are shown here. And each criteria is made up of different sub-criteria, which differ between the different guidelines. So make sure that you're adhering to that numbering nomenclature as Jerry suggested. It makes it easier for the reviewers to review your application. Okay, so while the assessment and cleanup grant guidelines are, have these same 5 ranking criteria, you notice that they have different points for the total application. 200 points for assessment and 100 points for cleanup. That's a little different than last year. For those of you who are experienced grant writers, you might notice the difference in the points. So, I'm sorry, did somebody ask a question?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
That's me. I didn't have it on mute. Sorry about that.
Okay. So pay particular attention to those 7 pages that Jerry mentioned that's new to this year, and it's called Section 5. And it's details on how we're going to score and rank your criteria for these 5 things, and it's very helpful. So let's see, going on to the description of these 5 criteria. Basically, we want you to link your story together for each of these. If you look at the points that are given to each of these 5 broad criteria, you notice that they're not listed in order of importance of points. They're listed in order of so you can tell a story about your project and about your community. If you notice that actually the largest, the points that go to project description and feasibility of success are the highest number of points, so that you want to devote a lot of time to that response. So let's see. Community need is where you'll provide a description of the community, including the historical and demographic facts, your brownfields, impacts to the community, and then the financial need of your community. And as I said, project description and feasibility of success is very important because you are going to present all the details of your project, what you're going to do, including finding other sources of money, because we want you to get to the end goal of redevelopment. We want to hear about each step you take to do that. So community engagement follows that, and that's how you're going to build on existing and establish new partnerships with your various stakeholders to engage citizens throughout the project. Project benefits, as you see here, the 4th criteria is where you'll describe the anticipated outcomes and benefits expected from your project in the context of the needs you discussed previously in community need. And then you want to talk about the broader planning efforts that you described in the project description. The last ranking criteria is called programmatic capability and past performance, and that's different than the rest of the criteria in that it's solely reviewed by your home region. It provides the home region or the applicant's region with basically the information that we need to know to determine that you can successfully manage the grant. So it doesn't get an average point review from 3 reviewers like the assessment grants or the average 2 scores from the cleanup grant reviewers. It's just reviewed by your one home region. Okay, so what I just want to say, wrapping up on this slide, is just make sure you're thinking these criteria through and you have a strategy before you even set your pen to paper, because you really need to ensure consistency throughout each of the responses to these criteria, because reviewers do pick up on inconsistencies. So going to the next slide. Okay, more details about the community need. The first sub-criteria of community need is target area and brownfields. If you notice a little difference this year, we're focusing your attention more as the applicant on defining the target area. We still want you to describe your community, but we also want a thorough description of your target area, which is typically a smaller area within the community. For example, the city of Shelbyville in Kentucky, their application, they described the agricultural and the industrial history of the city, but then they described a target area based on the areas already designated in their existing planning documents. That's how they define their target area. Provide the demographics on both the community and the target area, and if you need to, you can have more than one target area. Your score is basically based on how well you provide the information and how well you support the information with the demographics. Provide the demographics for both your city or your county or your community and the target area. Notice that because we have this new section of Section 5 that tells you how we're going to evaluate your proposal, something new has been added to that, and I want to call your attention to it, because it does say in there that for this criteria, your proposal will be evaluated on the validity of sources that you cite for your demographic information. So I call your attention to that because we want to know that you're using good sources, and if somebody is writing a grant proposal based on possibly 2009 census data, and then maybe the other proposals that are being written, they're written with 2016 or 2015 census data, it might just leave you open for not getting all the points that you could be awarded for this section. Just keep that in mind. It says in the guidelines the validity of sources that you cite for your demographic information. So anyway, your proposal will also be evaluated on the extent to which it makes a connection between the various challenges faced by the community and the target area, and then the brownfield sites and the cumulative environmental issues. And then the only way you can do really a good job of that is to describe your brownfield's effect and the proximity to its residents in your target area. And it's amazing to me that the number of applicants that kind of just miss the description of the proximity part of this criteria. So tell me how many, like, is it across the street from that affordable housing area, or is it across the street from a subdivision? Note that the evaluation criteria mention how these sites will be prioritized. I point that out because the ranking criteria really do not do a good job of saying that, but EPA reviewers will be looking for that. So going on to the next slide, number 38 here. Okay, the next subcriteria to community need is welfare, environmental, and public health impacts. We've changed this a little bit this year. We've actually hoped we make it easier for you because we want the welfare impacts to your target area, and they don't have to be linked to the brownfields as they have been in the past. However, we do want the environmental and public impacts linked to the larger community. So go to the guidelines and make sure you're reading this clearly and explain the unique situation in your area, such as any regional issues that might affect your target area. And think about the issues that we've provided for as examples, such as blight, safety concerns for the welfare impacts, and operating facilities and congested highways for the cumulative issues. I don't want to go into too much detail here because I'm a little worried about the time. We're already to 3:15. But I just want to point out that applicants will not get full points if there's not a good description of the broader impacts beyond the brownfields. Cumulative issues is all those other environmental issues that might be impacting your community. You could go to www.epa.gov/enviro to look up other sites that might be in your community. So then the next part of this is make sure that you talk about the public health impacts. Are the brownfields potentially impacting, say, the groundwater And is the groundwater the source of drinking water? Contaminants and their health impacts, all that information is out there online. ATSDR has published health effects online of their chemicals, and it's called atsdr.cdc.gov/tox profiles. We can make these links available later. So discuss any migration pathway that you need to connect the dots from the release to the community impacts. Okay, moving on to, and I just want to mention this last bullet. Be sure to talk about those sensitive populations, such as your children, your elderly populations, anybody you may have in the community that might experience an extra burden from the contamination. Okay, the last subcriteria for community need is financial need, and this hasn't changed too much from last year's. There's two parts to that, really. It's why you as the applicant need the funding and why you can't find the funding on your own and you need EPA help. And then the second part is really the part of why the burden is the impact to the community from the economic effects associated with the brownfields. So again, cite your statistical data and make sure you describe this really clearly, because we want to know why you have a compelling need. If you look at the evaluation criteria here, it says that we will determine how well you demonstrate that funding need, that you demonstrate the inability to draw on other funding sources, and how the local economic conditions may have been made worse due to economic disruptions. So this is going to be unique to your community. Okay, so let's see, slide 40, moving along. So just some useful tips to summarize. I know I've kind of tried to make some along the lines, but make sure you tell that story throughout your proposal. Set the stage in community need by providing a robust description of your target area, your brownfields, and then the communities that the grant will help. Why is your organization in need of EPA's grant funds? Did you suffer due to some negative situation in your local economy? And then consider all the impacts that your community may have. And note that our new guidelines don't require some of the things as they did before, so make sure you're just responding to FY17 guidelines. Okay, moving on here to other useful tips. Make sure that you notice if you are a coalition, provide the information on all the coalition partners and then their respective target areas. We have special stipulations in the guidelines for coalitions. Connect the impacts experienced by the nearby community members to the brownfield sites, which I mentioned. Use existing available information to support your claims, connect the dots, and then cite your data sources. Okay, do you want to go over the questions in the chat box? Jose, are you doing that?
Hey, Barbara, this is Brian. Thank you for that. We did have a question. Can you repeat the website you mentioned on your slide about the cumulative impacts? I think it was back on maybe number 37.
Yeah, I mentioned our EPA EnviroFacts website, and that's epa.gov/enviro, E-N-V as in Victor, I-R-O, Enviro. And you should see it. It pulls up a lot of sites from a lot of databases, from dry cleaning to RCRA to brownfields, so it's a good resource. Anything else, Brian?
This is Jose. That was the only one that I noted. I think the two have come in though. Do you want to take this, Brian? These 2 or 3.
No, go ahead, Jose. Yeah, I was gonna address those ones that just came in. Go ahead.
Sure. Shari, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, asked under the welfare's impacts. What do lack of access to community services refer to? Is that sewer, water, natural gas, or hospitals and colleges? What type of
yes.
Lack of service? Everything.
Yes, all of those. Whatever community services that you think that might that might be impacting that community that they don't have. So we want you to answer that that's unique to your community. So I like that. I like that. Actually, I hadn't thought about hospitals and colleges, but yeah, that could be a good example. Thank you.
And Philip asks, in general, can you discuss again how do we use the evaluation criteria? Example, how sites will be prioritized in evaluation criteria for brownfields and their impacts, but not in the guidelines until project description. Okay, so I guess the criteria, how will sites be prioritized in the evaluation criteria, but
well, Phil, I'd answer that this way because this is a new format this year. We probably will have some adjustment to that. So Phil is asking about the difference between maybe a little discrepancy between the actual ranking criteria and then the evaluation criteria. So Jerry, maybe can you weigh in on that? Do you see Phil's question?
I do, and I will follow up separately with Phil while I look that section up. So if you want to take another question.
Okay.
Okay. And then Roger asked a good question. Can EPA's EJ screen or State of California's Cal Enviro screen be used to demonstrate environmental burdens that a community might be facing? And the answer to that is yes. And if other states have other types of environmental justice tools, then those can be utilized as well. Beth asked, regarding the demographics table, should we use the 2014 American Community Survey data reference in the table? I think the answer is the most recent data that we can find is, or you can find, is the best data to use. So that could be applicable, correct, Barbara?
Yes, and I saw a lot of applicants last year cite that data, and it was very useful. Yes.
Okay. Don asked, which item did you say the regional person specifically looks at versus the 3 reviewers? So I think what she's referring to here is the threshold and the programmatic capability is what the regional person or person in charge of the application will evaluate, and the 3 reviewers is what the overall application will be looked at by 3 reviewers.
Yeah. Right. Yes.
Okay. And then last question, will the presentation be archived or available by website at a later date? And the answer will be yes.
And this is Jerry. If I could just jump in really quickly to respond to Phil's question again. For the assessment proposals, there is a discrepancy in the guidelines as Barbara mentioned, and so we apologize for not catching that ahead of time. We will figure out the best way to resolve this issue, but for now I'd say just focus on the information that we're asking for in Section 4, which is the ranking criteria.
Okay. There's another question from Denise. We heard that this year there's a congressional priority for more impoverished communities. Is that true? Jerry, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. That has not been mandated officially yet, and so what we're doing as a program to get ahead of it, under the cover letter section, you'll see a category where we're asking you to affirm whether or not you are a community that has experienced persistent poverty based on the definition that's listed. And so that just gives us an opportunity to start tracking the data, and if there is a congressional mandate on the number of awards or the percentage of awards that we need to make, we will do so in the spring.
And then Cherie from K-State tab asked, if the proposal is shared between 3 separate EPA reviewers, should acronyms be spelled out once in each section? Barbara, maybe you can chime in, but I don't know if it has to be in each section, but it would be helpful to maybe be reminded over the 15 pages.
Well, I think what I need to do is I need to clarify that the proposal isn't broken up, Sherry. So the proposal as all the whole narrative, the 4 criteria, ranking criteria, are going to be provided to the one reviewer. So yeah, you don't need to like repeat and restate acronyms in each section. I think Brian did a good job of responding to that.
This is Brian. I'll just add, just to clarify, the information I covered, which is all the threshold eligibility, that's reviewed by usually just one person from the region. And once you clear that threshold eligibility, then you're entered into the ranking competition, and the rest of your written narrative will be reviewed by the 3 reviewers. And that's what Barbara is covering, and Jose will cover the rest of it in a few moments.
Mm-hmm.
You want to do that last question?
Yeah.
There's a question about, I'll take this, Jose. There's a question, how about EPA reviewers versus regional? So of the 3 reviewers, generally at least one is what we call the home reviewer, which is a staffer from the region where the proposal is located. And the other 2 are randomly assigned, but there will be at least one home reviewer.
And this is Jerry, let me just add that can change from year to year. So what we like for applicants to really focus on is making sure that you are being responsive to the criteria, and let us figure out who will review what, because we don't want to say that this is how we do it all the time, because we have done it differently throughout the years. And again, the most important thing is just for applicants to be responsive to the criteria.
And there is a helpful link provided by Sherry, I believe. We will take a look at it and then maybe send it out. Jerry, would that be accurate? It's a USDA.gov topic on rural economy, population, and poverty. So we can take a look at this and see if it's, we can send that out later. One more question from Cynthia. Can a specific site be eligible if a city receives underground storage tank reimbursement funds and is on a priority list? That one I'm going to have to ask.
That sounds like a no, but we'd have to look at it site specifically.
Okay, so I'd say in the interest of time, let's keep moving.
Okay. Alrighty, we're going to move on to the next ranking criteria, which is titled Project Description and Feasibility of Success. And as I stated earlier, this is the by far the most important criteria. It's where you're going to present the details of your project. So let's see. I just wanted to say, in regards to what we were talking about the reviewers, is so if you are from Mississippi and you're writing your plan about your project, just keep in mind that somebody from Nevada might be reviewing your proposal. So provide little details about your community that they might otherwise not know. Okay, so let's see. For both grants, assessment and cleanup, both your proposals for these will be evaluated on the merits of the project that will be funded under the grant, how well it aligns with the target area's land use and the revitalization plans, and how well it incorporates equitable development practices or sustainable practices in a meaningful way. Basically, I like to say this is the meat and potatoes of your proposal because, as I said, it's your unique description of your project. What are your sustainable and equitable approaches that are going to help you achieve your goals? Maybe your project will reuse brownfields in ways that may result in improved access to transportation or healthier food choices. Some of the details we're asking now in this criteria, you might notice, were moved from project benefits from last year. This is also where assessment and cleanup proposals will need to describe the redevelopment plans for your brownfields. Reviewers are looking to see how well your approach lines with overall plans and how sound is your strategy. But don't miss this last criteria, this last bullet here, because this kind of added on to this last year. It's how well you will make use of existing infrastructure. Include all the steps that you envision to get to redevelopment. Reviewers don't award points for vagueness and generalities. And remember, the majority of reviewers, as we said, may not know about your community. So moving on here to the site-specific criteria of project description is the first one, is timing and implementation for assessment grants. Your application will be reviewed on the quality and reasonableness of your plan to ensure that you can implement the project within the 3 years. And by addressing these 3 different activities that we list on the slide, we can determine that you're a good candidate for a grant. And then don't forget to describe who is the person responsible for implementing and completing the activities. The first activity, contractor procurement, is the process for issuing your request for proposals or issuing your request for qualifications, depending on what you do as a local government. And then include the internal steps that you take within your organization to get to the approval. Does it require elected official approval? Does it require just department head approval? What does it take to award the contract? Okay, for community-wide and coalition proposals, make sure you describe the development of your site inventory or site identification process, and also the site prioritization and site selection process. Coalition proposals will be evaluated on the ability to demonstrate a clear governance structure, because you do have, the 3 entities that Jerry talked about before. We have to know that, there's a streamlined approach among the coalition partners to be able to prioritize and select the sites. So demonstrate that. And then both community-wide and coalitions need to describe how the community's input is going to be integrated in the process. And if you've mentioned the specific brownfields earlier in the proposal, then make sure you describe how they were selected and if the community had some input in their selection. And if you have a set of criteria for site selection, such as ease of access or level of contamination or public health threat or whatever your factors might be, then are you going to assign a weight to those different criteria? How will you determine which criteria is more important than the other? Is there a team or is there one person deciding which sites are going to be assessed? Okay, then also, so coalition proposals, don't forget that our guidelines do say that you have to have 5 sites as the minimum. But I like to advise that really coalitions are going for $600K usually, and you can usually assess a lot more than 5 sites. So I think 5 is definitely the minimum there. So look on page 33 of the assessment guidelines, because site-specific assessment proposals have specific requirements. So of course, instead of the site selection details, since you've already selected your site, we want the details about the existing conditions of your brownfield property. And then lastly, definitely describe that process for obtaining access. That's so important to us because access can be difficult to get, and we want to know that you can get it. You've got a process to get it. Do you have meetings with property owners? Do you send letters out? Do you go door to door? Do you already have access? If you have any brownfield property owners that already have provided permission for access, definitely mention that. Okay, moving on to the next slide. This is for cleanup. So the cleanup here, all right, you've got your existing conditions. We want to know about the site as much as you can provide detail within that 15-page limit. Talk about the current uses, the buildings on site, that kind of thing. The next sub-criteria, which is very important, is your cleanup plan. Go ahead and use the language from your environmental site assessment report or your ABCA. Whatever you have, you can definitely cut and paste there. That's okay. We're good with that. And if it's changed, if for some reason your ABCA was done a little while ago and you have different site conditions, then just explain that. We're okay with changes. That's all right. And then very important thing here is how your project aligns with your overall redevelopment plans. If you can talk about how that you have a comprehensive development plan or a little target area development plan, whatever you have, it's good to really talk about how that might be in line with what you want to do with our grant money. Okay, so let's see, let's go on here. And again, as I said for assessment, make sure you talk about how you will make use of existing infrastructure. Okay, so moving on to slide 46. Okay, so the task description criteria provides you with the opportunity to really go into detail. We want a detailed narrative that's going to be the same as your budget table with the same amounts. Check your math, make sure you distinguish between the work that you're performing for your organization and then the work that your contractor is going to perform. If you notice in our guidelines this year, we definitely stated that we want you to tell us about in-kind contributions. In-kind is a little different from leveraging. So because we're asking you to detail your in-kind contributions, I recommend you talk about it here. And then under leveraging, if you want to repeat it, that's fine, but we really want to see it here, and we want to see it down to the task level. So also, discuss any additional work that is needed to get to the redevelopment goals beyond the EPA funds. This is what we want to hear about from you because we want to know that you can get to the end goal of redevelopment. And also describe and enumerate any specific project outputs such as the ESA reports for your assessment proposals and your final ADCA for the cleanup proposals. We want to know about that. Distinguish between the different pots of money that we want to see, the hazardous substance funding and the petroleum funding. And then, can you get down to the level of providing unit costs and quantifying the work products? That's really important. The good proposals have those different the detailed level of costs. And then explain any costs that appear to be atypical because the reviewers will, they'll write that in their comments because they won't understand your rationale unless you state why you're doing that. So if you have a big complex site, that's a large site, go ahead and just explain that. You envision maybe 3 different phases of assessment to get to the completion and to move on with that site decision. And make sure all your grant-funded tasks are eligible activities. Jerry mentioned some of that in the beginning. So anyway, I can't cover all the evaluation criteria here that are in Section 5, but be sure to look on that on your own. And then notice that this yellow bordered box here says that for cleanup applicants, make sure that when you talk about your cost share activities, which you should do, make sure that those are eligible activities as well. So that has to be the same as for our EPA funds. So moving on to the budget table, just use the example that we have in the guidelines and the example that we have here. The difference in the budget table, though, as opposed to the narrative is that we do not want to see any funding besides just EPA. We don't want to see the leverage funding. We don't want to see the in-kind. We just want to see the EPA money here. And, these project tests that are listed here from program management to cleanup planning, these are in 95% of the assessment grants. But you don't have to have those. It can be unique to your project. Maybe you want to have project tasks that include site inventory or site prioritization. Whatever makes sense for you is fine. Just explain that in your narrative. Okay, and then the next one is the budget table example for cleanup. And the difference here is this is where we do want to see non-EPA funds because we want to see your cost share. And as Jerry and I think Brian both mentioned, keep it to the 20%. Do not exceed that. And so calculate it for here for this $400,000 grant. It's it's $40,000. I'm sorry, for this $200,000, it's $40,000. Okay, and then describe only the eligible cost shares activities, as we said before. Okay, moving on to leveraging, I think. Let's see. Yes. Ability to leverage. So this is really important because we know that our money is just seed money. We don't think that you can accomplish all the goals with just our $400,000 or $200,000 or whatever you're asking for. It's really seed money, and we want to know that you have ways to get the additional money that you might need, whether it's other federal sources such as CDBG money, or whether it's local funding, or especially state assistance. Have you talked to your state partners, and do you understand the state program and realize the tax incentives that might be applicable to this section? Because anything like that is leveraging. And as I said, if you want to talk about the in-kind here, you can again. You can kind of quantify your in-kind contribution because, that is leveraging. That is fine. We do want to know that. And note here in this last bullet, if you don't have any sources of leverage funding, just provide an example of a recent case where you went out and found other sources. This year, you will be evaluated on the ability to demonstrate firm leveraging. So if you do have firm leveraging, such as already a grant, just provide maybe the cover page from that grant, something that shows the date that you got it, the amount that you have, or if you have some leveraging from another organization, just have them write a letter, a good letter that says, how much they're leveraging, and that it's going towards this project. That's the main thing. We want to know that it's relevant to this budget, to this project. Okay, let's see. Did I cover everything I wanted to under there? I think so. Let's go on. Okay, so these are just the tips. I hope I've covered some of them, but if I haven't, you can see them here. Just describe things step by step, clearly paint the picture from A to Z, and talk about your project, and then tie it back to those things you talked about in the community needs section if you can, because if you said that your community needs a community center, in the community needs section, maybe talk about how your project is going to get that for them by the end of this section. Again, we talked about the alignment with the existing revitalization efforts, in-kind support, ability to leverage, and so this last bullet, we really haven't mentioned that yet, but 10% of your assessment grant can go to health monitoring activities if you are a local government, like planning councils and other quasi-governmental agencies. They can't include this 10% health monitoring, but local governments can. So if you are proposing that, just make sure that you have a good description of that, because reviewers won't award full points if it isn't fully described. And make sure that it's in your budget. Okay, I'm thinking I'm done there.
I think Brian is answering a couple of questions.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. I'm going to refer a couple of questions to you that came in that maybe you can speak more broadly.
Okay.
The first is a question from Heidi, and it is, if the cleanup is part of a downtown revitalization, where would be the best place to discuss these details so that EPA can get a full picture of the importance of the cleanup to the revitalization of the town?
Oh, I think that you would want to bring that in when you describe your community, and then when you talk about the link of the project and how it aligns with your existing community plans for the downtown, you would want to talk about that again. And then later, as Jose is going to talk about, probably, when you talk about the project's benefits, how is it going to benefit that, Main Street corridor, or that downtown area, things like that. So it's okay to repeat things, I like to say, but when you do repeat it and mention it, try to mention something new about it. It's really going to be dependent on your proposal. I hope that was helpful. You want to answer Sherry's question?
Another question is from Sherry Bennett.
Yeah.
The question is, how detailed should we be in redevelopment plans? For example, the county wants to convert gas stations into community kitchen and motel into senior housing.
Yes.
I would just say the clearer picture you have of what you want to do with these sites, the better. And certainly what Jose is going to talk about the project benefits might be a good place to discuss that. But definitely if you have a vision for what you want to be doing with some of these sites, that is a very good thing to include.
Yeah, I don't think you can be too detailed. Like, any details you have to show us that you have a clear redevelopment plan, Sherry, would be great, especially these community uses. They sound very, very promising, so that's attractive.
Then we had a couple of questions about the health monitoring you mentioned, Barbara, examples.
Oh, okay. So Denise, that's a good question. So health monitoring has to be related to the activities of the grant. So I like to think of that as if you say a cleanup grant and you're going to say put a trail. This is kind of an easy example, but I'm going to use it. So if you have a cleanup grant and you're going to put a trail down, and that will mean that people will get out there and they will be walking and skateboarding along the trail and using it for recreational use. Some type of health monitoring might be, are they losing weight using that recreational trail? Jerry might be able to add anything to that, but it's a tough one because we don't have a lot of applicants that do go after this health monitoring. So I'll open up the lines for anybody else that wants to add anything to this.
I think some examples are...
Oh,
go ahead, Brian.
Go ahead, Jose. I was just going to say the Brownfields program does have a fact sheet that's a few years old. I'm going to see if I can upload it into the file box in the webinar.
Oh, good. That's very helpful. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'll be able to do it.
Okay, and I guess next is Jose. Are you going to be doing community engagement and partnerships?
Yes. Thanks a lot, Barbara. Again, my name is Jose Garcia. I'm with Region 9, Project Officer in the Pacific Southwest region. And I'll be doing the next 3 ranking criteria. So I will try to zoom through these. And please feel free to ask those questions in the chat box if you need clarification on anything. So the next criteria that we'll be discussing is the community engagement and partnership criteria. And really, this section is really important because it'll demonstrate how you will involve the community and other stakeholders, and it helps to develop your project partnerships that are necessary to achieve the benefits you will discuss in the next section, which is project benefits. So stakeholders is it's a pretty broad term, and it can represent any array of groups that might be affected by the project in addition to the broader community. So some stakeholder groups include neighborhood organizations, citizens groups, property owners, lenders, business organizations, obviously environmental groups. For tribes, it could be tribal council, it could be senior groups. Stakeholders are pretty broad. So when engaging the community, you want to, in this criteria, very clearly describe the plan for involving that affected community during the planning of your project, which has already begun to take place or will take place very soon, and the implementation of your project. For assessment grants, there is kind of 3 distinctions for those communities for each type of assessment grant. So for site-specific assessment grants, the community will be probably smaller. The affected group will be smaller because it is a smaller target area. For community-wide assessments, that will be slightly bigger, if not substantially bigger, because it is a larger target area, oftentimes a corridor of some sort or a redevelopment district. So how you will reach out to folks and engage them will be different for that size area. And then thirdly, for coalition assessment grants, those are generally much larger and, as we mentioned, have a minimum of 3 coalition members. So each of those can be very distinct communities requiring possibly very distinct types of outreach. So be sure in your proposal to note that, those specific types of outreach that you'll be utilizing. Also in this section, you want to mention how you will keep your community engaged. So when we look at community engagement, those proposals that score highest are the ones that will show that the community is engaged at the beginning of the project and maintained engaged and informed throughout the life of the grant, which is, as we mentioned earlier, 3 years. And you want to highlight for each one of those communities, why is this the best approach? So As many of you know, there are many different types of ways to engage communities. These public meetings are one way, webinars are another, using the news media, presenting at city councils or tribal councils. I've heard of folks using radio shows to get the word out, different social media. So why is this the best approach for the community you're dealing with? For those communities where English might not be the predominant language, also do remember to include any type of translation, simultaneous interpretation that you will be using in those communities, because if you mention this in your community description section, then a reviewer will look and say, well, if you say that this is your community, why aren't you reaching out to them in the appropriate means? Also, one other distinction for cleanup applicants, describe the plan for addressing the residents' health, safety, and disruption concerns during the cleanup of the site, and how you will be protecting sensitive populations and nearby residents during that work. One of the sections under the community engagement partnership ranking criteria is also the partnership with government agencies. So in this section, you're going to need to identify the local, state, and tribal environmental agencies that are responsible for implementing the Brownfields program in your community. Also note how you will be working with them and describe how they will play a role in your project or program and throughout the life of the grant. Additionally, there are other relevant agencies. Barbara mentioned a few, like ATSDR. There are other state and local and tribal health agencies. At the federal level, this could include Department of Transportation or HUD. So be sure to include some narrative on how you're going to be working with them, how they will be engaged, and the work that they'll be helping achieve. If it's a cleanup grant, also be sure to discuss your involvement with the government, with the local government agency or appropriate government agency to enroll that site in the voluntary response program or voluntary cleanup program that local regulator has. And then partnerships with community organizations. This is really, really key, I think, in a successful project and a successful proposal. Describing, one of the things you will do in this section of the ranking criteria is to describe the community organization that you'll be working with and their role in planning and implementation. So again, through the life of the project. We understand that in some communities there are no community organizations that are really capable of helping out with these types of projects. If that's the case, then you can state this and demonstrate how the community, how you have engaged the community and how you will continue to engage them as the grantee. In some cases, you can hire consultants or contractors. There might be other entities that can be subgranted to use for that engagement, but we understand that there are not always community orgs in certain communities that can help out with your project. And one clear distinction, in this section, we don't want you to mention the government organizations or local municipal departments you'll be working with. This really is your community organizations, and as I mentioned, this can be nonprofit groups, faith-based groups. It can also be chambers of commerce, other business-related groups, housing groups, things of that nature. Schools, labor groups, environmental groups, all those suffice for community organizations. And you want to be sure that the partners that you are involving are relevant to the goals of your project. So, there's a lot of groups out there. If they're not going to add value to what you want to achieve, it's probably not worth your time, very limited time to engage them at this point. They might at some point, but it may not help strengthen your application. Doesn't say you can't, but it may not add as much value as if you go seek someone out that is working in the brownfields, environmental, or redevelopment sphere. Let's see here. And part of that engagement and involvement that you'll have with those community groups to help reach out to the public and keep them engaged will be solidified in the letters of commitment that you should submit with your proposal. These letters of commitment should provide a sketch of the organization and then also the specific and preferably quantifiable roles that they will contribute to your project. For each organization that you mentioned in your application that will be helping you with your project, you should have a letter of commitment. If there is no letter of commitment included, there are very good chances that you will not receive points for their involvement. That is the way that they prove to us that they are actually, putting some skin in the game and supporting your project, or through those letters of commitment. The information in the letter should be consistent with the information in your proposal, so you certainly want to sit down with them and share the goals of your proposal and project. You want them to include unique letters, not form letters. I think you'd be surprised at how many very identical letters we receive from communities. So approach them early so they can write something that is unique to your project. If you don't have time or the capacity to get a unique letter from them, or if they don't, if a form letter is the only option, I would recommend that at a minimum, one of those paragraphs in that form letter clearly delineate and outline the type of support, quantifiable support that they will be providing to you to make it stand out from all the other letters. And don't wait until the last minute to get your letters from them. The earlier you engage them, the better that they will be able to help you in your project and be able to provide the letters of commitment to you. They should be addressed from the partner to you, the applicant, not to us, EPA, and definitely include the letter in your proposal package. As Jerry mentioned at the beginning, we want to get one large PDF that is very much preferable with all the materials in there, not 15 different sheets. And sometimes we get multiple letters of commitment from applicants, so it becomes pretty onerous if they come in separately. So do not send them separately. Send them all in as one big package. And the third section in this ranking criteria is working with your creating partnerships with workforce development programs. So if you have plans to promote local hiring and procurement, or to link members of the community to potential employment opportunities that are generated from this, the work that's going to be taking place under this assistance agreement, you should certainly mention that. One good way, well, I'll mention this in the tips, but that is one of the sections that you'll have to answer, so please do not forget to do that. Some useful tips on this ranking criteria is to be sure to be descriptive in how the community members will be engaged and why your approach is appropriate and effective. I did mention that, but it bears being mentioned again. If you are a current or past Brownfields grantee, feel free to share some stories on how success stories of previous approaches that you've used and how they worked in the communities that you've worked with. If you're not a Brownfields grantee, but you have worked with community engagement, feel free to share those success stories to illustrate how and why your approach will work. Demonstrate that you've already engaged the community. Your submission of the application shouldn't be the first time that they're hearing about this. There should be some legwork ahead of your submission, and you want to note that in your application. Also describe how the community input was solicited to help you formulate this this proposal and the work that you want to do. Again, if you're going to be applying for some health monitoring or using the funds for health monitoring, you should discuss community engagement activities behind that. And finally, for the job training grantees, you can contact your EPA point of contact, which Jerry will mention at the end of the presentation, and it is also in your guidelines, to find out if there are any job training grantees in your area. If not, you should describe how you're going to work with, reach out to your local workforce development programs that your city or county or state might have. So that, I think we're at the end of that ranking criteria. I don't know if there's any questions that might have come in
Jose, it's Jerry, and you've done
Yes.
such an amazing job that we don't have any questions.
All right. I either answered them all or bored them into submission. So,
I think you answered them all.
yeah.
So I'd say let's move into project benefits, and I'll continue to manage the Q&A box for you.
Okay, great. Project benefits. In this ranking criteria, the project benefits that you will be highlighting that will come out of your work in the project include welfare, environmental, and public health benefits that are anticipated. So you want to describe how these benefits will address the challenges mentioned in the community needs section. Often throughout this presentation, you've probably heard us refer to this proposal as a narrative, and that's exactly what it is. It's a very long 15-page narrative. So you want to continue tying the needs of the community, which you outlined probably on page 2 or 3, with the work that's going to get done and the benefits, which you're mentioning somewhere on pages 13, 14, or 15. So make sure to keep those things tied together. Otherwise, they will it will not flow as logically as it should, and you might leave some questions in the mind of the evaluator. For those economic and community benefits, whoa, presentation just left. I think it's coming back up. There it is. For those economic and community benefits, please discuss the potential outcomes and the economic benefits or non-economic benefits and other community benefits which may be achieved through redevelopment of sites addressed under this grant. So there was an earlier comment regarding plans that a county or a city or a tribe may have in a certain, say, target area where they want to convert do assessments on gas stations so that they can convert them into a community kitchen. That is an amazing community benefit that I think should be outlined if those are some of the plans. And those are quantifiable. You can say that you're removing potential exposure to people, and you are now providing, a community kitchen that will serve X number of people per month, and benefit, a certain number of community members throughout the year with the work of this new kitchen. Additionally, there was an example of converting an old motel maybe into something like senior housing or affordable housing. That's also very quantifiable community benefit that would be wonderful in an application if that's the goal of a county or a city. So those are all really good examples. Transit-oriented development, light rail, things of that nature, also quantifiable. So this is where you want to mention that. And again, discuss how all these benefits fit into the larger community revitalization plans that your community might have. Benefits, again, I can't impress this enough. The benefits here should tie back to the needs that are noted in the community needs section, and also tie them into the project description and how that work from the project will kind of make these benefits happen. Where possible, again, if you can quantify those benefits, that would be great. And a couple useful tips for this section. Carry them from, again, carry the needs from, or carry the themes from beginning to end of the proposal. So you want to be sure that you do have that nice linear logical narrative. And you want to show how these benefits fit into the community's vision for revitalization. So when you're explaining all these benefits, look outside of maybe just that one target area, especially if you have a site-specific assessment or cleanup, and how that fits into the larger vision for revitalization for your community. And again, be as specific as possible in describing anticipated benefits and quantify those economic benefits if possible. All right. All right. I think we're done with that ranking criteria.
Okay. Well, the only question that we had come in that we answered was just to clarify if letters of support are needed, and I clarified that we are looking for letters of commitment from community organizations to affirm their commitment to the project and their contributions that they will make during the project period, but we do not need letters from governmental organizations.
That's correct. All right.
That was the only question.
Okay. And then this is the last ranking criteria that I will cover, programmatic capability and past performance. And as was mentioned earlier, this is one of the sections that your home reviewer, that only one EPA reviewer will look at and evaluate. So the first section under this criteria is the audit findings. If you as an applicant or as a past grantee have any adverse audit findings, you're going to want to explain them here. If there's some stuff that needed to be worked out in the past, it's better to explain it here than and let us know than to try to hide it, because you don't want us finding out. So do feel free do explain that those adverse audit findings and how they were addressed in this section. Additionally, if an applicant does not have any adverse audit findings, you mentioned that here as well. Don't leave it blank. Just say we have no adverse audit findings. For programmatic capability in that section, this is your opportunity to demonstrate your organization's ability to manage the grant and to oversee the proposed work. Part of that is identifying the sufficient personnel and resources that you have to carry out that work. If you do not have enough personnel, or you are maybe lacking in a certain technical area, or your staff is, then this is also your section where you can tell us and describe how you're going to secure personnel to help you with that. So that can be hiring a consultant, getting support, in-kind support maybe from a community partner, hiring someone to help take care of a certain aspect of your project, someone maybe that does GIS, or if you need, some sort of hydrologist or something like that. This is your section on mentioning how you are going to get them if you get the grant to help you ensure that the project is successful. And the final portion of this this section is the measuring environmental results and anticipated outputs and outcomes. So you want to discuss your plan to track, measure, and evaluate progress. And for those unfamiliar with outputs and outcomes, for a cleanup site, that can mean removal of X number of tons of soil and contaminated site, and that's your output, and your outcome is reduction in exposure to umpteen hundred people that live close to the site. Or number of community meetings would be your output, and number of people educated and engaged in your project could be your outcomes. So those are very quick and dirty examples of outputs and outcomes. But it's important to be able to show those and demonstrate how you're going to measure them. For your past, the next section is the past performance and accomplishments, and there are 3 categories under this section, and everybody's going to fit into one of them. The first one is past performance for those applicants who are past or current Brownfields grantees. That's the first. The second is applicants who are not past or current Brownfields grantees but have received other federal or non-federal assistance agreements. And the third category are those applicants who have never received federal or non-federal assistance agreements. And I'll kind of go through each one of those quickly. For those past and current Brownfields grantees, and this includes those grantees that have received assessment grants, cleanup grants, RLFs, or 128A grants, which are states or tribes or territories. Please describe the accomplishments you had through those grants on the most recent, the 5 most recent grants that you've managed, Brownfields grants that you've managed, how you complied with the work plan, schedules, and the terms and conditions, any corrective actions on those past grants that may have needed to take place, and discuss your history of the timely and acceptable reporting of deliverables, and this includes acres. Other deliverables are quarterly reports, final reports, your federal financial reports. Mention how you've turned those in a timely fashion. And finally, why your funding expenditure on those and why additional funding is needed to address brownfield issues if you've gotten brownfields funds in the past. So you want to explain that there. Oftentimes it's an expansion of the target area or continuing momentum or the next phase, but you want to explain that in that section. For those applicants that are not past or current brownfields grantees but have received federal funding or non-federal funding, oops, my slide just moved up a little. You want to describe the awarding agency or organization and the amount and the purpose of the funding that you received. Accomplishments that you got out of the grant. So you want to mention the last 5 grants that you received. If there are any specific outputs or outcomes, definitely highlight those. Compliance with your work plans, schedules, terms and conditions, similar to the previous example. Any corrective actions for past grants management issues. And then also discuss history of timely and acceptable reporting under those grants. So what we're looking for here is certainly a track record of success with managing grant funds and assistance agreements. And then lastly, for those applicants who've never received any federal or non-federal assistance agreements, just affirm in this section, you will affirm that your organization has never received any types of federal or non-federal funds, assistance agreements, and then you will receive a neutral score under this section. Let's see. And just be sure, I guess one of the little tips in the yellow box is to be sure that your past performance, you're responding to the correct past performance and accomplishments criteria. Don't answer the wrong one. And again, it's repeated here again that be sure to successfully manage the grant, or to demonstrate that you can successfully manage the grant and produce measurable results that are discussed in your proposal. So that's what we want to see in this section. I think that might be my last slide. So I don't know if any additional questions came in on that, Jerry.
Thanks, Jose.
Sure.
We actually had 2 questions to come in, so I'll just briefly mention those. I think one was punted over to me. So the question is, if you need to address audit findings for only grants or also for government budgets, the guidelines as written just require you as the applicant to talk about any audit findings as it pertains to non-federal and federal grants. I'm just looking for the language in the guidelines just to be sure. This is one of those questions where we honestly don't have a whole lot of guidance, and so we leave it up to the applicant to respond the best that they can.
Jerry,
Yep, go ahead.
I'm sorry, it doesn't specify because I looked it up after I saw her question. It does say describe any adverse audit findings, but the paragraph that follows it really does talk about grants. So
right.
Typically that is really what we just look for is grants.
Right. Yep, thank you for looking that up, Barbara.
Sure.
And Jane also had a question looking at the point distribution for programmatic capability that applicants will automatically receive less points if they've never had an assistance agreement, and that is correct. We consider that to be a neutral score because EPA can evaluate one way or the other how well you would be able to manage the grant if you are selected for funding. We have such few cases, and I do mean less than a handful of cases each year of applicants that fall into that category. So the majority of our applicants have received some type of assistance, federal or non-federal, in the past. Okay, so thank you, presenters. We're nearing 4:15, so what we'd like to do just quickly is open up the phone line if there were questions that you wanted to ask over the phone to clarify information that was presented today. Again, if you have a site-specific question, we encourage you to contact the regional contact listed in Section 7 of the guidelines. And so on the slide lists each person's phone number and email information for your convenience. So if you have a question, we'll take just a couple of minutes to answer questions over the phone. And if you could hit #6 to unmute yourself and ask the question. All right. Well, that's good. I'm hoping that we were able to answer most of the questions either during the presentation or from the Q&A pod. So lastly, I would just encourage you all to save the date for December 5th through 7th, 2017 in Pittsburgh. That's going to be our next National Brownfields Training Conference. We hope to see you all there. And again, just as a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded, and we will post the recording on our OBLR page. And we will leave this room open for about another 10 to 15 minutes in case you wanted to download any of the files that are in the file pod. Additionally, for tomorrow, as a reminder, is the TAB EZ webinar hosted by our TAB grantee K-State, and the information is there under the TAB EZ webinar page. Blaze, if you're still on the phone and want to hit #6 and put in a plug for tomorrow, please feel free to. Blaze isn't there, but that's okay. So tomorrow at 2 p.m., the webinar room will be available a little bit before 2. The link is there, and it will be the same conference code as today's webinar, and there's no registration. It is free, so please just join us to get some more tips on how to write your proposal. So thank you, everybody who participated today.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thanks.